Hi, this is Ben with Novolux Stereophonic, and today we're going to take a close look at the Marantz Model 1120 integrated amplifier. This is going to be a two-part video. First part will be some historical context, a front panel function review, rear panel connections, and then the second part will be a deep dive inside of the unit. We'll take the cover off, look at how the unit is built, a review of the restoration that was done, and run it through some bench tests. So if that sounds interesting, please stick around for part two. So let's get started with some basics. This unit is made in the USA, which makes it kind of unique. It was produced between 1973 and 1975 with a retail price of roughly $450 US. It's rated at 60 watts per channel into 8 ohms at 20 to 20 kilohertz. So a nice little integrated amplifier. Integrated amps consist of a preamp section, so all the stuff we see on the front for selecting sources, controlling tone, things like that. So preamp combined with that 60 watt power amplifier in one chassis. A receiver would be the same thing, but adding a tuner on top of that. Next, I'd like to review some general Marantz history so that we can properly place this piece in context, within the Marantz puzzle. So there's an excellent article up at audiohistory.com which gives a pretty detailed look at the Marantz company from inception all the way through modern times. So I'm going to paraphrase some of the stuff from that article to give us the information that we need to figure out where this kind of fits in. So the early 1960s were what's called the golden age of Marantz. This was the Model 7 preamp, Model 8B power amplifier, Model 9 monoblocks, and eventually the 10B tuner, which was considered the pinnacle of FM at the time, and to some people it still is. That's an amazing, amazing tuner. But it was so expensive to produce, and they underpriced it, and it almost drove the Marantz company into the ground. And Saul Marantz ended up selling the company to Superscope in 1964. After Superscope took ownership, some production was moved to a larger facility in New York, and then eventually everything was shipped across the states to the West Coast in California. In 1967, Saul Marantz, who was still working at the company, didn't like the direction the new owners were taking things. So in 67, he resigned, and along with him, Sid Smith and Dick Sequeira left the company. So a lot of the golden era, engineering talent had left, and the company has firmly transitioned into the solid state age. Now, shortly after that, Superscope purchased a 50% interest in the United Radio Corporation, and with that, moved the production of the majority of their receivers over to Japan. Now, when most people think about Marantz, they're not thinking about a piece that looks like this. They're thinking about the 1970s Japanese-produced 22XX series, like the 2270. What a lot of people don't know is that while those Japanese receivers were in production, there was a whole line of products coming out of the US. So during that period of the mid-70s, in the US, that is where all the high-end separates got produced. So preamplifiers, amplifiers, tuners, what they called the A line. Now that includes things like the Model 500, which borrowed heavily from the design elements of the Model 9 monoblocks with the removable front cover and front panel speaker binding posts and stuff. And that's the pedigree that this was from. And when we open it up, what you'll see inside is this beautiful layout, modular design with these really cool blue PCBs. So that's kind of the historical context of this. It was produced in that window where stuff was still made in the US on the California side, and soon after this, the US production kind of fizzled out, and the company got bought and sold a few more times after that. All right, let's take a closer look at the front panel of the 1120. And one of the first things you'll notice is that there's holes on each of the four corners. These were in place for mounting applications. So when you bought this unit, there would be a template included in the box that you could stencil an outline and cut out a hole to place this within a cabinet of your choice or mount it in the wall or whatever you want. The only stipulation was that you had to put some sort of bracing on the back to take up some of the weight of the amplifier section. Now, one of the things to keep in mind with this is it can't be mounted just like any piece of 19-inch modern rack equipment. This faceplate is only held on by 2 points. There's a nut behind this knob and a nut behind that knob. So you can't just connect it here. There's too much weight. It would end up bending the faceplate. So you either have to provide some sort of custom mounting to it, or what a lot of people did was put this inside of the WC-1U wood cabinet. So what that consisted of was a cabinet with a sliding wooden rail on the bottom that you could adjust so it could fit many different Marantz units. So what they instructed you to do was remove the feet, and then inside of the box they would supply you a bag of hardware. So they give you 4 wood screws to mount to the front of the cabinet, and then you would adjust that wooden piece on the back and then mount a couple screws from the bottom into the old foot locations. So that's how the mounting was done on this. Let's go ahead and fire it up. So when we turn this on, this indicator is going to come on. Traditionally this is incandescent. It had failed, so I converted it to LED so that it doesn't become a problem for many years to come. Let's go ahead and fire this up. Really beefy power switch back here. Actually, before we do that, one thing to notice is that from this angle you can't see it, but the power knob or switch cover is slightly more recessed into the chassis than the other controls. These are all mounted on a PCB that's behind this faceplate. This is a separate power switch that's kind of set back into the chassis. So this switch cap is almost like 2.5 inches long. It's kind of funny. We'll see that on the inside. So I'm powering it up again. And as you saw while it was off, this took a while to fizzle out. Because it's LED and I'm coming off of the main power supply, it takes a while for that power supply capacitor to drain. So with this modification, what you get is when you power it off, this will take a while to fade down to nothing. We also heard when the power on, there was a relay click. That's the speaker protection relay. In this model, that protects against low frequency, high-level low frequency oscillations, and it's just a power on delay. So we can go ahead and run that again. So that's the protection relay there. All right, let's go over some of this stuff here. So on the selector switch, if we were to go to mic, we'd be selecting these. So these are TS mono inputs. So you would have a individual left and right. This is kind of obsolete nowadays. People don't really use receivers or integrateds to record audio. The dubbing in and out, this is kind of unique. So the dubbing in is actually a secondary way to access the second tape monitor. So there's some tape inputs on the back that you could select here or with the tape monitor button. But as an alternative, what you can do is get an 1/8 inch cable, 1/8 inch on both sides, put an 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch adapter on it, and then you can plug into an iPhone or MP3 player or something and give yourself a front panel auxiliary input, which is kind of neat. So with this type of setup, I could put music into here. I just have to push the tape monitor button and this front panel jack will come into play. It does not work if you have the tape monitor off and go to tape 2. It's just when you select the tape monitor 2 that comes into play. It's an interesting little feature. And then the dubbing out is just a TRS stereo output of a copy of the tape outs on the back of the unit. So one of the things they go over in the manual, which is pretty outrageous, is the ability to hook 3 tape decks up to this thing, which is beyond me why they would even put that in a manual. I don't know why anyone back in the day would want to have three decks, but they give an example of recording a very long program and your first cassette deck is going to run out of tape and you don't want any gaps, so then you transition to the second tape deck and maybe even the third, so that you can load a tape onto the third, whatever. I don't know, but apparently that was a big thing, is they pushed in the manual. You could hook 3 tape decks up to this thing. So tape 1 and tape 2 are self-explanatory. Phono, this is to access our phono stage, and this actually has pretty good gain. When I do a line level source into this and phono, they're pretty comparable in volume. So this has a pretty hot phono stage, 47K input on this, the input on the back for its tuner, and an auxiliary source. So quite a few inputs on this thing. We're going to start out with auxiliary here, and I'm just going to get some Beethoven going while we're listening to some stuff in the background here. So the other controls, tape monitors. When I push this, this is going to cut the audio because I have nothing plugged into the tape inputs. Mono in, this is a little bit of a weird configuration for an integrated amplifier. So a lot of times you'll get a rotary control, like on the Macintosh stuff, that'll be left plus right, left only, right only, reverse, stuff like that. But in this, they decided to do some buttons. So it's going to be hard to hear on this mono mic, but if I push left, that's only my left channel, only my right channel to both speakers, and then if they're both depressed, it's going to mix the left and the right channel together and output them equally. Balance control is here in the middle on a slider, so that's full left. There's a center detent, there's a little click here, and then full right. there is no way to defeat the tone circuitry, meaning these are always in circuit. There is a little detent here that gives you the 0 position, but these are always in circuit. So we can hear how that affects the sound there on these guys. The low filter, this is meant for like low frequency rumble and stuff that you might get on your turntable. High filter, they recommend this. I think the cutoff is 9 kilohertz. Let me check. Yeah, 9K is the cutoff for this. So there's this, these each have a really steep slope, 12 dB per octave. So on the low filter, this is everything below 50 hertz. It's just going to almost cut off, almost a brick wall. And then same thing at 9 kilohertz. Now on this one, the high filter they recommend for a really noisy tape or a bad vinyl recording and stuff that might take some of the harshness out of it. Negative 20 dB muting. This just lowers the output level. Some people might use the toggle between like listening level and background music level, just as like a convenient push button. It also gives you more range of the volume control. So at this level, if I release it, it's gonna be much louder. And then of course loudness. So when I go through the technical description, we'll see why this sounds a little bit funny, but loudness boosts the low and the high frequencies at low listening level so that when you're listening very quietly, it appears more flat to your ear. You can see it kind of changes the presence there. And then the last thing we have here is the speaker system. So this, you can connect 2 sets of speakers on the back. So if I deselect speaker 1 where I'm connected, I'm going to lose my output. Headphones is always active. That's just some resistors on the power amplifier. And that's about it for the front panel. Really nice, clean, symmetrical looking unit. I really like it. Let's spin it around, take a look at the back. Let's start out here in the upper left. We've got a set of convenience outlets. This one is unswitched, meaning whenever this cord is plugged into the wall, the device plugged into here has power. And then these two work in conjunction with the front panel switch. The 300 watts limitation back here is to protect the power switch. If you put a high current device in here and are constantly switching that on and off with the power, it's going to arc the contacts and eventually wear out that switch. Down here it says precision crafted in USA. And then on this label over here, Sun Valley, California. These are our 2 speaker outputs. These use push pin connectors. This will fit up to 14 gauge pretty easily. Anything bigger than that is not going to go in there. These are selected with those front panel system switches. Little ground here is just a chassis ground for hooking up your turntable. And then these 4 screws here give us a hint, which we'll see in part 2. This is actually a whole card that pulls out of the back of the chassis. It's a really neat design. And then the power amplifier section is also modular. These screws, and I think these 2 and a couple on the bottom, you can pull out the whole amplifier section. So this is our typical inputs and outputs. So we've got our phono, tuner, auxiliary, a couple tape in and outs, and they're doubled here with DIN if you have a single cable connection for your tape deck. And then we also have a left and a right scope output. This is designed to be used in conjunction with a tuner that has an external scope input. A lot of the really nice tuners back in the day had a front panel oscilloscope that would help you dial in the station, check your stereo separation, things like that. So if it has an external input on the back of the tuner, you could use it to monitor the audio signal coming out of this, even if you weren't listening to the tuner. So that's kind of a cool feature that left and right scope output is there. And then here we have our pre-out, main, and jumpers. I had some vintage Switchcraft RCAs laying around and some scraps of Kimber PB&J, so I made up these nice little jumpers to link the preamp and the power amp sections together. It's a nice little upgrade there. Before I wrap up part 1 here, I just wanted to go over my general impressions of the unit during listening tests. So before I go on, audio is all subjective. Everybody has different tastes in what speakers they like, what music they like to listen to, if they like a lot of bass, not so much bass. So take everything that I'm going to say here with a grain of salt. When I listened to this unit, my personal impression was that because the preamp section doesn't have a tone defeat, I needed to play a little bit with the tone controls to get the sound to where I liked it. But when I fed the power amplifier directly with a source, it was really, really nice and enjoyable to listen to. So I know the power amplifier in this unit is solid. The preamp section, for me, just left a little bit to be desired, but there's other aspects to this as well. This is a very, cool piece to collect. It's historically significant to some degree, and it just feels really nice. They look great in wood cabinets. It's got that nice blue LED, so overall, really, really cool piece. If you were kind of intrigued by some of the stuff that I hinted at for the part 2 video, stick around and we'll jump inside the unit.